So I wasn't originally planning on buying it, but I saw the Switch 2 Pro controller in a shop window on my local high street. I purchased it, and the thing is that I have a Switch 1 Pro controller already. There are a couple of compatibility things with the Switch 2 that were just kind of a bit annoying, where, for example, you can't wake the console up from sleep using the Switch 1 Pro controller, whereas you can do it on the Switch 2 Pro controller. That is far from like a deal breaker for me. That's far from, worthy of buying a Switch 2 Pro controller, but I did see a lot of positivity about this new controller, and I thought, you know what, why not buy it? It was actually below MSRP as well when I purchased it, which is what made me decide to buy it. But I've been using it for a few weeks now, and I have a lot of good things to say about it. In fact, I don't think I have a single negative point to put towards this controller. I think it's like incredible. But then I sort of had the thought, like, is it actually that much better than a Switch 1 Pro controller? So in this video I'm going to sort of talk about both of them and compare the two and basically explain what makes the Switch 2 Pro controller that much of an upgrade in comparison to the original. So yeah, let's head on over and compare the two. So looking at them both side by side, you'd probably be hard pressed to tell the difference in terms of ergonomics that I was just talking about. The difference is that the Switch 1 controller is kind of a little bit wider and the grips kind of come out a bit, whereas the Switch 2 Pro controller is more sort of straight down. And when it's in the hand, like, you can feel the difference. This one feels wider and this one doesn't. Also, this one's a bit heavier as well. That's something that definitely took a bit of getting used to when I first held this one, because yeah, it does feel lighter, but I much prefer the ergonomic grip on this one. I feel like it just fits better in my hands, even though I've got quite big hands. So like, this controller being wider should feel a bit better, but it actually doesn't. Like, it's ever so slight, the difference. But there is a difference, and this just feels more snug in the hands. You know, the main thing between the two is the sort of materials that they use, right? Now, the Switch 1 Pro controller, I mean, this is a pretty cool looking controller. It's got like this transparent shell at the top, and this is not rubber. It looks like it's rubberized, but this is just like a hard plastic, like a textured hard plastic. There is an obvious cutoff. It's like, you know, the grips are individual pieces, whereas the shell is not. With the Switch 2 controller, it is literally like, it's two pieces. You've got the front panel here, and then you've got the grip part, but it's all like one single piece of plastic, and it just feels so premium. Like, there's something about it, not feeling the gaps when you're holding it. It just feels so clean and polished. Obviously, like, they're both using plastic, but the Switch 2 Pro controller is using a much softer feeling plastic. If you own a Switch 2 and you know what the Joy-Cons feel like, it is a similar sort of material to the actual Switch 2 itself. Whereas the Switch 1 like is a lot harder, and it just feels very hard, bulky in the hands, you know. But there is one thing about the Switch 2 Pro controller, and it's that, and I think that it is down to the material that they're using, but it gets quite warm. It's not like the battery's warming up, it's not like the controller itself is warming up, it's the heat from my hands as I'm playing that are sort of just transferring onto the controller itself. And that's not something that I really saw a lot of people talking about in reviews. But yeah, like, this controller feels warm after a while because of the heat that my hands are generating. The plastic that this controller is using doesn't seem to be like dissipating the heat as well as this, where this feels quite cold to the touch and it kind of stays cold as well. So yeah, that's the main thing in terms of the ergonomics and the overall design of the controller. But if we like look closer at the actual buttons, right? The buttons on the Switch 1 controller, I quite like them. They're not clicky and they're not like membrane either. They're almost somewhere in the middle, and they are quite loud. The Switch 2 Pro controller is similar. The buttons are similar, but they're larger and they're not as clicky. they do still have noise to them, but like they feel as clicky as the Switch 1 Pro controller, but they just don't sound it. And I quite like that about the Switch 2 controller, is that it just feels a lot quieter. Also the plus and minus buttons here, they're a lot they're like raised up, whereas on the Switch 1 Pro controller they aren't. So I found sometimes that I would accidentally hit the home button when I'm trying to hit the pause button. But that's not the case here, because the plus and minus are like slightly raised compared to the Switch 1 Pro controller, so you're not going to be accidentally hitting the home button anymore. The Switch 2 Pro controller also has that C button as well, which is like, you know, it does the game chat thing. I'm not really interested in that though. Flipping them over to the top here, and the designs are actually very similar, but you'll notice that the pairing button, or the sort of controller number button, is different. On the Switch 1 Pro controller it's at the bottom, and on the Switch 2 Pro controller it's at the top. And the reason why is because at the bottom of the Switch 2 Pro controller there is a headphone jack now, whereas the original did not have that, which is, again, that's a huge win, because if I remember correctly, the Switch 1 was kind of finicky when it came to Bluetooth headset pairing. I'm not sure if it's similar in the Switch 2, but I do remember that being a problem. But yeah, the D-pad feels relatively similar. Again, it's just slightly larger on the Switch 2 Pro controller, and I think that's kind of just the main thing. Like, all of the buttons feel larger, even though the controller itself feels smaller. But yeah, going back to the top, we have a USB-C connector on both of them, and then we also have the sort of pairing button, and this like charging light LED indicator here as well, which just, you know, tells you how much battery's left on the controller and whatnot. The biggest thing that I want to talk about is the analog sticks, because like this kind of blew me away. Now, when I was watching reviews, like, I knew that the Switch 2 controller had like really cool, really smooth analog sticks, but I didn't quite get a grasp of just how smooth they feel until you've actually used them yourself. Just briefly to go to the Switch 1 Pro controller. Now, bear in mind, I've had this controller for about 6 years now. I got this back when I got my Switch back in 2019. So this is quite an old controller. Even though it is so old, I've not had any stick drift or anything like that. But the analog stick has always felt very rough, and this is the case with other controllers as well. Like, let me pull up here's the Xbox Elite controller, which is a very premium controller just by comparison, and the analog sticks, again, they're a bit smoother than the Switch 1 controller, but they still feel, you can still feel the stick sort of grinding up against the edge of the controller. But I mean, this is definitely one of the nicer feeling analog sticks that I've had, and also this thing has like tension control as well, but you know, that's not what this video is about. So the Switch 1 Pro controller actually does feel very rough, and it feels very like grindy. I don't know if you can hear that, but yeah, it feels very, very rough, and it's not a bad thing. Like, this is just what most controllers feel like generally. But now that I have tried this controller here, and this is just, it's magic. Well, it's not actually. I'll explain what they're doing in a minute, but this just feels so smooth. And I'm going to put it up to the mic again, and you won't be able to hear a thing. Like, there is genuinely absolutely nothing. It just feels like it's gliding around the place. And the reason why is because, and I'm going to try and zoom in as much as I can, but the analog stick is at full tilt now, and you can kind of see, I hope that it's noticeable in the video. I am trying my best here, but it's not actually hitting the edge of the controller there. They've put a rubber pad up against the analog stick so that it doesn't grind up against the edges of the controller. So it just makes it feel very smooth. And I think that this should help with stick drift as well, because a lot of the like grinding, it can cause stick drift. So yeah, the Switch 2 Pro controller is actually quite a bit different to the Switch 1 Pro controller. It doesn't really look that different on the surface, but there are quite a few differences and just some quality of life things that make it feel a bit more premium. Another one, which I haven't even touched on yet, is the inclusion of these back paddles here, and these have to be assigned on a per game basis using the Switch 2 menu. I usually like to have this one as the run button and this one as the jump button, especially in like games like Zelda, for example. These are like back paddles are kind of like considered a very premium pro controller type thing. Like I just brought out the Xbox Elite controller and that has back paddles as well, but again it's in a completely different price tier to the Switch Pro controller. This is much more comparable to a base Xbox controller or a base DualSense controller, you know. The rumble functionality is also a bit stronger on this as well. It depends on a game-to-game basis. Like, I've found that in some games this controller actually feels kind of weak, but I've been playing like Hollow Knight Silksong recently, and it has probably the best implementation of rumble I've ever seen in a game, and it's actually incredible on this controller. I am a little upset that the triggers are still like buttons rather than like analog triggers. I think that if Nintendo wanted to take it a step further, they could have implemented like a trigger stop thing here, where to bring it back again, the Xbox controller, the Xbox Elite controller, it obviously has full analog triggers, but then you have these switches here. So if I put it down to the lowest setting, now it is sort of the same as the Switch controller, right? I think that if Nintendo implemented something like that, just so that it would be better for PC gaming, then that would have been awesome. But, you know, this isn't really going to be a controller that you use for a PC. But that brings me to my final point, and that is, why not just use the included Joy-Con grip, right? And I think that this is what most people are going to do when they buy a Switch 2. If they're using it in docked mode, they're probably just going to throw the Joy-Cons in a grip and, you know, that'll be it. And, you know, I think this is fine. Ergonomically, it's kind of a mess. Like, it doesn't feel very nice in my hands. There's something about just how square this is that just feels weird to me. It's far from bad, but it's not great. But there are some things about the Joy-Cons that are just not as good as the Pro controller. For example, the analog sticks. Now, I have analog stick grips on this, so let me just take this off. The analog sticks are really small and they don't have a lot of travel. Like, they just don't feel... They're fine when in handheld mode, but compared to the Pro controllers, like full degrees of travel, where it just feels... This is very much, you know, not as premium. Also, the buttons are a lot smaller. There's no like true D-pad, and yeah, it's not as nice, you know, it doesn't feel as nice. Now, you can actually buy like a charge grip for the Joy-Cons, which actually have the back paddles on as well, and that might be a decent option. Again, if you're comfortable and fine using this layout, then that's great. But for me personally, I find it really uncomfortable, and the Switch 2 Pro controller is very comfortable. This is probably the most comfortable controller that I own. It's just the right weight. The Xbox Elite controller I love, right? I think it's a great controller, but it's very heavy, and it's very the rubberized grips just feel kind of, you know, I'm just not a big fan of them. So having like this, it's like a big chunk of plastic, and it just feels very, very nice in the hands. Now, I will say I actually had a bit of an issue with this controller. It wouldn't pair during like wireless mode. I had to plug it into the Switch 2 using a USB-C cable. And after that, it now pairs every single time with no issues. But I did find that a bit odd that the controller just wouldn't pair to begin with, like using the actual pairing button. The battery life is, I would say, about the same as the Switch 1 Pro controller. Like, the Switch 1 Pro controller's battery is about 30 to 40 hours, right? And it's pretty much the same as this. Like, I've been completely like no-lifing Hollow Knight Silksong, and I have put like 35 hours into it now, and I remember like I had it fully charged just before I started my playthrough, and yeah, like a couple of days ago it actually, you know, gave me a low battery sign, so, you know, I just plugged it back in. It lasted about 30 hours, which for a game like Hollow Knight Silksong, which is very, very heavy on like HD rumble, yeah, that seems about right. I think if you're going to be using it for other games which don't use HD rumble quite as much, then yeah, you're going to get north of 40 hours on this controller. So overall, I am very happy with my purchase, and I think that it is definitely worth an upgrade. but just know that they are more subtle upgrades rather than like this big transformative change, right? But honestly, like, just for the comfort level of how nice this controller feels to hold, it's so much more comfortable than the original Switch Pro controller. And I thought that the original Switch Pro controller was super comfortable as is. I didn't know how Nintendo could really improve on that. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for now. If you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative at all, let me know, drop a comment. Do you have the Switch 2 Pro controller? Yeah, make sure to like and subscribe because it helps the channel a lot. And I'll see you in the next one. See ya.